Lewis Hamilton leaves Ferrari to rejoin McLaren, heading back to the team where his F1 journey began. Want to know why he made this move? Interested in the eye-watering salary McLaren is offering for his comeback? If so, stay tuned until the end. I'll tell you everything. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. The detonation that ripped through the world of Formula One wasn't a slow-burning rumor or a carefully leaked negotiation. It was a full-force shockwave that blindsided even the most connected insiders. Lewis Hamilton, the seven-time world champion whose career had been forged in high-pressure battles and historic triumphs, was no longer a Ferrari driver. There was no drawn-out speculation, no ceremonial farewell at the end of the season. His departure was immediate, surgical, and ruthless. Hours after walking away from Maranello, the announcement hit. Hamilton had signed with McLaren, not for the following year, not for some distant project, but for now. The next race. The next session. Effective on the spot. The paddock went into meltdown. By the weekend, he would be back in PAPAYA Orange, parked in the garage beside LANDO NORRIS, igniting one of the most sensational driver storylines in modern F1 history. The numbers attached to the deal were staggering: $35 million net, negotiated in total silence, hidden behind layers of confidentiality so tight that even certain McLaren executives were unaware until the ink was dry. Yet the financial figure was merely a headline grabber. The true weight of the move was emotional, strategic, and personal. This was Hamilton breaking free from a suffocating environment, reclaiming the narrative of his career before it was stripped from him, and returning to a place where the belief in his ability was unshakable. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. For those who had been paying attention, the foundations of his Ferrari exit had been cracking long before the press release. The intoxicating glow of the Maranello dream had dulled before the season's midpoint. Charles Leclerc wasn't just ahead on the leaderboard, he was controlling the heartbeat of the team. Engineers gravitated toward his side of the garage. Key updates seemed to arrive there first. Tactical calls that once felt collaborative were now predetermined. The language in briefings shifted subtly but unmistakably. Leclerc's needs were priority adjustments, Hamilton's concerns were data points to consider. Hungary was the race that turned discontent into certainty. Leclerc delivered a drive so clean it looked effortless, pulling away lap after lap. Hamilton, meanwhile, was locked in a frustrating duel with a setup that refused to bend to his feedback. When the checkered flag dropped, it wasn't just a gap in seconds, it was a statement in neon. Inside the Ferrari hospitality suite, Frederic Vasseur intercepted him in one of the narrow, sterile corridors at the back. There was no preamble, no false warmth. His words came like a blade pressed flat against the ribs. A driver of your caliber should not be this far behind. It wasn't framed as constructive criticism. It was a judgment, plain and final, and it was spoken within earshot of staff who would repeat it in whispers before the night was over. In that moment, Hamilton understood the shift. Ferrari no longer viewed him as untouchable. Minutes later, he was sitting under the glare of the press room lights, still hearing Vasseur's voice as the questions came rapid and unfiltered. Have you lost your sharpness? Has Leclerc overtaken you as the team leader? Do you regret leaving Mercedes for Ferrari? The photographers caught every tight swallow, every flicker of restrained irritation. To the public, it was just another post-race grilling. To Hamilton, it was the clearest sign yet that the tide had fully turned against him. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. What almost no one knew at the time was that McLaren had been quietly circling for weeks. It started with a seemingly chance meeting with Zak Brown during a weather delay at another circuit. Small talk in front of others, followed by a longer, quieter conversation behind closed doors. Then came a message from a trusted McLaren engineer from his early career: "We're building something you'd want to drive." The invitations began to layer: a tour of Woking under the guise of a charity event, private simulator sessions framed as technical consultancy, discrete car performance files sent through secure channels. The pitch was delivered with surgical precision. McLaren didn't promise him a supporting role or a slow integration. They promised him co-leadership, parity with Norris, and the full weight of their technical program at his disposal. They reminded him of 2007 and 2008, not to dwell on nostalgia, but to reinforce the fact that they had seen him at his most dangerous, and they wanted that Hamilton back. They offered something Ferrari had stopped giving: unwavering belief without conditions. Once the thought took hold, the rest moved at breakneck speed. The legal paperwork was drawn up under an alias project name, signed in a neutral location with only a handful of witnesses. Ferrari was kept in the dark until the deal was beyond reversal. When the news finally broke, McLaren's calm, almost understated announcement contrasted with the chaos erupting in Maranello, where emergency meetings were called to control the narrative and stop a full-blown morale collapse inside the team. Hamilton's first return to McLaren headquarters was a moment thick with significance. The corridors were lined with familiar faces, some older, some new, and the air buzzed with the unspoken knowledge that this wasn't just a signing, it was a statement. His seat fitting was done in absolute privacy, but those in the room swore there was a shift in his demeanor, a lightness absent for months. When he arrived at the track that weekend, the change was undeniable. He didn't walk into the garage like a man adapting to a new team. He walked in like he belonged there, like the gap of over a decade had been erased overnight. The handshake with Norris was firm but brief, the eye contact steady. His first laps in PAPAYA were fast, aggressive, and controlled, a warning shot to the rest of the grid. Ferrari had tried to define his ending. McLaren had handed him a brand new opening chapter. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. In the days that followed, the shift became impossible for Hamilton to ignore. It wasn't an open confrontation or a dramatic announcement. It was a series of small, calculated adjustments, each one shaving away at his position until the shape of the team around him was unrecognizable. Briefings that had once revolved around his insight now orbited entirely around Leclerc's preferences, the agenda subtly reshaped to suit a different voice. Simulator schedules, which for years had been coordinated with precision around his input, were now finalized without him even being consulted. One by one, the engineers who had been his anchors, the people who understood every nuance of his style, were reassigned under vague performance restructuring labels, their expertise redirected to the other side of the garage. Even the design conversations he did manage to sit in on carried an unmistakable slant. Chassis development notes described characteristics that didn't match his driving philosophy, aero projections were optimized for sharper turn-in rather than mid-corner stability, and every diagram on the table felt like it had been drawn with Leclerc's instincts as the blueprint. The whispers that followed him down the hall confirmed what the data already suggested. The next car was being built not just with someone else in mind, but almost as if he wasn't even part of the equation. Outside the technical bubble, the changes were just as clear. Sponsor photo shoots began to feature Leclerc more prominently, his image plastered across Ferrari's digital channels while Hamilton's media presence dwindled to carefully curated, secondary content. At hospitality, conversations with senior staff felt shorter, more transactional, stripped of the easy camaraderie they once shared. There was a certain guardedness in their eyes, a polite form of distance that told him decisions had already been made in rooms he no longer had access to. Hamilton was not a man built to wait for others to decide his fate. His entire career had been a series of moments where he seized control before circumstances closed in on him. And now, with every sign pointing toward a slow relegation into irrelevance within the team, he knew the choice was clear. The next move had to be his, and it had to be made before the season's momentum locked him into a corner he couldn't fight his way out of. What he didn't yet know was that elsewhere, far from Ferrari's orbit, someone had already been studying this very moment. Zak Brown had always had an eye for opportunity, the instincts of a man who could read not just lap times, but the politics and psychology of the grid. He had been tracking Hamilton's situation quietly, the same way a seasoned driver watches the weather radar before a storm, looking for the exact moment to strike. Brown had no illusions about what Hamilton could do if placed in the right environment. He had seen the way the Brit could change a team's culture, energize its workforce, and carry it through impossible battles. And when a discreet contact hinted that Hamilton might be willing to discuss something immediate, Brown didn't hesitate. The meeting was arranged with surgical precision. No high-profile locations where a single photo could leak to the press, no public venues where whispers could spread. Instead, it was set in a private dining room above a discreet marina in Monaco, the kind of place where the staff were paid well enough to never speak a word about who they served. The view from the balcony overlooked rows of motionless yachts, their engines humming softly under the warm evening air. Hamilton arrived without ceremony, no entourage, no visible security, just a man walking into a space where the decisions on the table could shift the balance of the entire championship. Zak greeted him with a measured handshake, and there was no drawn-out warm-up. He leaned forward slightly, speaking in a voice that carried both conviction and urgency. "Lewis," he said, steady and deliberate, "I know exactly what's going on over there. I know they're pushing you out of the center, piece by piece. I'm not here to talk about next year. I'm talking about now. I want you back in PAPAYA, leading our fight, making this season yours again. 35 million, net, no compromises, because I know you're still the man who can take a team to the top." Hamilton studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. It wasn't just about the money, or even the car. This was about regaining control of his narrative, stepping away from a team that was quietly edging him toward the margins, and stepping back into a role where every meeting, every upgrade, every strategy was built around his instincts. Through the open balcony doors, the harbor lights flickered across the water, but inside the room, the air was still, heavy with the weight of a decision that could detonate through the paddock like a shockwave. Both men knew what this meant if it went ahead. Ferrari would be blindsided, scrambling to fill the void, rival teams would move to counter the power shift, and the media storm would dominate every headline until the season's end. But for Hamilton, the thought of walking back into a garage where the team was truly his again, where the eyes of every mechanic and strategist turned to him for direction, was enough to remind him of something he hadn't felt in months: control. Zak Brown approached the meeting like a man setting up the final move in a championship-deciding chess match, every detail calibrated, every variable accounted for. The room he chose was buried deep inside McLaren's headquarters, beyond the reach of stray eyes or wandering ears, a place where the outside world simply didn't exist. When Lewis Hamilton stepped inside, there was no hurried greeting. He paused at the threshold, scanning the space like a driver walking a circuit for the first time, noting every corner. His arms were folded, his face unreadable, but there was the faintest spark behind his eyes. Not yet agreement, but the kind of curiosity that could tilt everything. Brown didn't waste time on pleasantries. He opened with a steady rhythm, a few low-key remarks about the current balance of power in the sport, the subtle shifts in team dynamics, and the openings beginning to appear in the championship landscape. Gradually, he steered the conversation toward McLaren's transformation, the precision of their new wind tunnel, the razor-sharp correlation between simulator projections and track data, the mid-season development packages already proving lethal on lap times, and an internal culture built for driver leadership rather than political infighting. Hamilton listened without giving much away, but when he spoke, his questions came fast and hard. Would his input truly shape the car's evolution? Would the chassis be adapted to his driving style from the ground up? How far would McLaren push the envelope on aerodynamics to chase pure pace? Brown answered with calm authority, talking about experimental floor designs, aggressive weight redistribution plans, and a philosophy that treated the driver's feel as equal to the engineer's metrics. They dove deep into specifics: brake cooling efficiency, ERS deployment patterns, tire wear modeling, before circling back to the intangible: unity, trust, and the freedom to drive without political constraints tightening around him. Hours slipped away as the conversation wound between raw technical detail and flashes of personal history. They revisited moments from Hamilton's first stint in Orange, the controlled chaos of his debut season, the intensity of title battles, the euphoric first win. But nostalgia wasn't the focus. The weight of the discussion was aimed entirely forward. When the meeting finally ended, Hamilton didn't say yes. But there was a subtle shift in his stance, a faint smile that wasn't there before. Brown, seasoned enough to read the signs, knew the decision was already taking root. 2 days later, it was official. Ferrari's top brass were blindsided by the speed and precision of the move. Hamilton had activated an obscure exit clause under extraordinary competitive and environmental circumstances, legal language that sounded vague in public but spoke volumes inside the paddock. To those who understood, it meant one thing: frustration with stagnation, discontent with politics, and a sense of being strategically diminished. McLaren's communications team moved with surgical speed. Within hours, the press release was out, polished to perfection, as if it had been sitting ready for the moment the green light came. Hamilton's return to the McLaren Technology Center was nothing short of a spectacle. Engineers left their workstations mid-task, mechanics leaned against railings with wide grins, and the corridors filled with a low buzz of disbelief and excitement. Veterans who'd seen him lift trophies in Orange looked like they were watching history fold back on itself, while newer staff gazed at him with the kind of awe reserved for living legends. In the heart of the building, LANDO Norris waited. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes gave away the gravity of the moment. Their handshake was firm, their expressions locked in a silent acknowledgement of the challenge ahead. Almost instantly, the formality gave way to rapid-fire discussion, cornering strategies at Silverstone, energy deployment tricks for qualifying laps, and where rivals were bleeding time through sector splits. There were quiet laughs over paddock politics, knowing smirks at certain rival teams' weaknesses, and an undercurrent of anticipation neither of them tried to hide. When Hamilton finally walked out of the building that night, the energy he left behind didn't fade. It lingered in the conversations echoing through the factory, in the glances exchanged between engineers, in the restless excitement of a team that knew something had shifted. This wasn't just a signing. It was the arrival of a force capable of reshaping the season's trajectory, a move executed with the precision of a master strategist and embraced by a driver who refused to let his story be defined by the past. In that moment, McLaren wasn't just back in the fight, they were preparing to change the fight entirely. "So, looks like we're parking in the same garage now," Lando said, leaning against the doorway with that trademark mix of cheek and challenge, eyes narrowing just enough to let Hamilton know the words carried a spark of competition. "Yeah," Hamilton replied, a grin sliding into place like it had been waiting there all along. "Guess I'll need to adjust to being the other fast Brit in PAPAYA." Lando smirked, tilting his head slightly. "Careful, mate. I've seen how you launch off the line. Might be me breathing down your neck before the first corner." The laugh they shared was genuine but thinly veiled, carrying an undercurrent neither could miss. The humor was real, but so was the message. This wasn't just small talk, it was the first move in a season-long chess match. Lando knew exactly what it meant to share a garage with a driver whose name was etched into the sport's history books. This wasn't just another teammate. This was a living benchmark, a driver who had built a career out of extracting victories from impossible situations. Hamilton, for his part, understood that the McLaren he was stepping into wasn't the team of his rookie days. This was a leaner, sharper, hungrier version, armed with engineers who didn't care about reputation, only results. Minutes later, Zak Brown called them both into his office. The click of the door shutting seemed to seal the air, trapping the tension and anticipation in the room. Zak leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk, his voice calm but threaded with purpose. "Lewis," he began, locking eyes with the seven-time champion, "I didn't bring you here for nostalgia. I brought you here because I know you can still be the most dangerous driver on the grid. I remember the kid in 2008, fearless, precise, relentless. I believe that same fire is still in you, and I want that here, in this team now. I'm not looking for good weekends. I'm looking for dominance. I want the rest of the paddock to feel us breathing down their necks from the first lap to the last. This is our shot to change the narrative." Hamilton's response was slow, deliberate. He leaned back, crossing his arms, eyes narrowing in thought. A quick glance at Lando, sitting forward, elbows on his knees, jaw tight with focus, and then back to Zak. "Then we don't waste a second," Hamilton said, the words quiet but loaded with conviction. Zak nodded once, then cut straight into the truth. The car had raw pace, but not enough consistency over a full race distance. Strategy needed tightening. Pit stops had to be flawless. With Hamilton and Lando attacking together, they could dismantle the comfort zone of teams ahead of them, forcing Red Bull and Ferrari into reactive mode instead of dictating the pace. Lando took it in without flinching. He knew the microscope would be on them from the first practice session. Every split time, every tire choice, every on-track battle would be dissected and compared. But the thought didn't intimidate him, it energized him. He imagined the first qualifying session they'd share, the tension of an outlap, the garage silent except for the hum of engines and the click of keyboards as times flashed purple and green on the monitors. For Hamilton, the moment carried a different weight. This wasn't about reliving his past, it was about rewriting the present. He'd fought through every possible pressure point in the sport, the rivalries, the politics, the near misses, and still walked away with his name tied to records. Now, McLaren offered him not a farewell lap, but a weapon. As they stepped out of Zak's office, the easy humor from earlier had vanished, replaced by something far more focused. The glance they exchanged was charged with respect and the promise of a fight neither intended to lose. Word of the meeting spread faster than anyone expected. Rival engineers whispered about potential setup secrets Hamilton might bring. Analysts began revising race predictions. Sponsors quietly shifted marketing budgets to prepare for the media storm. In the garage, under spotless covers, two PAPAYA machines waited, one carrying the weight of McLaren's present, the other carrying the determination of a champion who wasn't here to participate, but to seize control. It happened with the kind of ruthless efficiency that leaves even the most jaded figures in Formula One momentarily stunned. One day, the world was still chewing over the fallout of Hamilton's high-profile split from Ferrari, his name splashed across headlines dripping with speculation and postmortems, and the next, he was already buried deep inside McLaren's operations hub, hidden from the public eye but working like a man possessed. The simulator room was his war room, lights dimmed, the glow from multiple data displays reflecting off his helmet visor as he sat locked in, breathing in sync with the virtual car's pulse. His hands moved with deliberate precision over the wheel controls, recalibrating paddles and buttons, nudging seating angles by fractions of a degree, hunting for that perfect merge between man and machine. The conversations with the engineers were relentless, more interrogation than discussion. He pressed for specifics on aerodynamic stability through long, off-camber sweepers, probed for the exact torque response under full ERS deployment in damp conditions, and drilled into brake temperature variances under alternating heavy load and lift and coast sequences. He compared tire degradation models against real-world stints, dissected fuel consumption curves under different power modes, and insisted on corner-by-corner overlays between his simulator laps and Norris's telemetry. He wasn't simply absorbing information. He was shaping the car around his instincts, bending it into a weapon calibrated for his hands alone. McLaren's veteran mechanics, who've seen every kind of driver adaptation, exchanged looks that said it all. He wasn't just fast to adjust, he was rewriting the team's baseline in hours. By the next morning, the transformation had detonated through the paddock. McLaren's garage had become the epicenter of the entire championship's attention. Broadcasters dragged heavy camera rigs into position, reporters fought for microphone space, and fans in vivid PAPAYA flooded the barriers, phones held high like they were capturing a coronation. Every move Hamilton made became instant social currency, walking side by side with Norris, leaning over a technical briefing with Zach Brown, gesturing mid-laugh with an engineer, and each clip or photograph ricocheted through millions of timelines before the hour was out. In Maranello, the scene was the opposite, a fortress under siege. The official statement spoke of continuing mutual respect and strategic divergence, but behind the corporate polish there was no mistaking the truth. Ferrari had been caught off balance. McLaren had seen the fracture forming long before it reached the public and moved with surgical speed to take their shot. The blow wasn't just about losing a driver, it was about losing the narrative to a rival whose timing was perfect. Behind closed doors, whispers grew sharper, arguments more pointed, as team leaders tried to pinpoint the moment they'd let the situation slip out of their hands. For Hamilton, the change wasn't an escape, it was emancipation. Gone were the boardroom politics disguised as team harmony, gone were the veiled suggestions about playing a supporting role to protect someone else's long-term plan. McLaren's pitch to him was clear: no games, no leash, no agenda other than winning. Here, every lap could be a statement, every move on track a direct reflection of his own will. He wasn't stepping into a car, he was stepping into a battlefield on his own terms. From McLaren's perspective, sentiment was just a bonus. The headlines about a homecoming were great for the fans, but the true strategy was far colder. This was about constructing a driver pairing that could destabilize the grid's power structure, about mixing Hamilton's strategic brilliance with Norris's fearless aggression to create a two-pronged attack capable of throwing even Red Bull off rhythm. It wasn't romance, it was war preparation. When Hamilton zipped the orange overalls up for the first time in over a decade, there was nothing ceremonial in his expression. It wasn't a man looking back, it was a man loading the chamber. The fabric wasn't nostalgia, it was armor. He didn't care about proving Ferrari wrong or silencing critics. His focus was narrower, sharper. He wanted to prove to himself, and to the track, that the reflexes were still wired for combat, that the fire was still hot enough to burn through the fiercest opposition. In his mind, the next race start wouldn't just be another set of lights, it would be the opening salvo of a campaign to dismantle the hierarchy. The launch would be violent, the pace relentless, the racecraft merciless. Verstappen's dominance, Norris's momentum, Leclerc's hunger, it didn't matter. When his visor dropped, there would be no politics, no compromise, no hesitation. There would only be the clean, lethal execution of a racer who had been given back his freedom and was ready to make the entire grid regret ever letting it happen.